that if someone hasn't had the experience with account groups and actually building account groups by GL account instead of by category, that's another one of the magical things about Sage Intacct is that you can go and you can build using account groups. The trick there is making sure that you've got ranges. You don't do it by specific account to account. You do a whole range.
Welcome to the AI in Accounting podcast. Now, here's your host, Joshua Feinberg of Vic.ai.
Hi, it's Joshua Feinberg from the AI in Accounting podcast, and I'm being joined today by a very special guest, Michelle Schimberg, who is Director of Business Outsourcing Services at Armanino. Welcome, Michelle.
Thanks, Joshua. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you here. Whenever I work on finding the right guests for these kinds of interviews, in this particular case, we're going to be talking about Sage Intacct best practices. But before we do that, I always like to set the context of who you are, how you got to where you are in your career. Did you always want to be in accounting? What did you study in school? What was your progression before you got to Armanino, and really how your group fits in with the firm as a whole? Could you walk our listeners through a little bit of background?
Happy to do that. First of all, I actually went through college. I went to college pre-med. And Chem and I didn't get along in accounting. I was getting a solid A in accounting without even thinking about it. So I went accounting. Started at Deloitte and then spent 25 years of my career leading finance teams in nonprofits primarily. Everywhere I went, I generally updated the accounting system or did something to make the system work better and make it work to its maximize its use. And about 6 years ago, I discovered Sage Intacct and fell in love with it because of the reporting, using it in nonprofits. And 3 years ago, I was considering what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't really want to do closes anymore. And I got involved I came to Armanino and started helping clients post and during implementations. So I had been implemented and knew that when you're involved in the implementation, a lot of times it's scary when the clients or the consultant's asking you to populate a template and you don't know what that means. So I've put together a team of people who are experts at Sage Intacct, have actually lived in the real world and actually used it, been audited, and that's how we help our clients.
That is amazingly fascinating because I see so many parallels. In the course of doing these podcast interviews, I don't know if it was necessarily with people that specialize in Intacct, but pivoting from pre-med into accounting, that one has come up before. Multiple people that got their start in Intacct with nonprofits. Yes. Multiple people that almost everyone I've talked to about Intacct started in private industry, loved Intacct so much that they didn't want it to just be 20, 30% of their job. They wanted it to be 100% of their job, and instead of just one company, multiple companies. So in marketing, we call that a buyer persona, but it's amazing. And I'm sure there's entire teams of people at Intacct that study this, but yes, it's amazing. The similarities that you see. And then, so 6 years ago, you started using Intacct. 3 years ago, you joined Armanino.
Yep.
That's led you to where you are today. So when you come across a coworker at Armanino, or you come across a client that is relatively new to Intacct, and maybe they were using a cloud accounting platform before, maybe this is their first foray into like a true mid-market ERP platform, what do you tell the beginner, regardless of whether it's internal or client, on your favorite tip or tips on how to get started with Intacct?
So as far as how to get started in Intacct, I think the use of Intacct, one of the game changers for me was the general ledger report. I know it sounds like a simple report, but the fact that the general ledger report, I can pull a general ledger report for a range of dates, which from the nonprofit world, we all understand that grants generally are not the same as your fiscal or your calendar year. So you can pull a general ledger at any date range you want, and you can filter it for whatever dimension you want. So if you want it for this grant, for this vendor, for this department, I can filter that report. Then the other thing I can do with that report is I can memorize the report and I can place it on a dashboard. The dashboard was the thing I actually feel very guilty about the first implementation I did, because I left that firm without dashboards set up. And I did so because I didn't realize how easy they were. Now I've actually offered to that client to come back. I'm like, I'll take a vacation day. I'll come to your office and I'll set you up with dashboards, because that's the magic of it. You can give people limited access to a dashboard and they can self-serve. You no longer have that issue of someone coming into your office and needing to say, hey, what was this number on my financial statement? They can drill all the way down to the actual transaction.
The power in the dashboards and the dates filtering and dimensions from the general ledger report, and that moving into a dashboard that basically like self-memorizes. You just basically save it and then it's there.
Yeah.
Does that factor into how you onboard new clients when you're working with implementation or?
Absolutely. So if I'm involved in implementation, I usually like to early on in my implementation start talking about reporting, because I think that transition between a segmented general ledger chart of accounts to the magic of dimensions with Intacct is really hard sometimes for people to digest and understand how it's going to work. So I think it's really important when you're doing an implementation that you start with reporting. Walk them through what the reporting is going to look like. Walk them through what the end result is so that you can backwards map into how you need your chart of accounts to be set up.
Do you think any of this changes depending on whether you're working with somebody in like an outsourcing context or whether you're doing straight consulting, advising someone who has an in-house team that's implementing?
I think that the difference between an owned license, what they call a VAR license, and like your SIAP where you're doing outsourcing, is that generally the client, as the implementer, the client is your firm. They're the ones who are actually doing the work. You still need to involve the client, the firm's client, whose numbers you're tracking in the system, to know what they need out of it. But as far as the use of the system, generally you're speaking to your team of outsourcers. So yeah, there is a difference in the sense of with an outsourced accounting, you can get a little bit more, you want to stay a little bit more stable. You want to try to have it more consistent so that your users in your department understand how to use the system and it's not changing it constantly. When I came into Armanino, I tried to standardize our chart of accounts so that my accountants, my team that was doing the actual accounting, when they got something that was salaries and benefits, they knew that they went to the 6600s. You know, it helped them understand how to use the system and be able to be more consistent for our clients.
Has that been something that you found challenging across different kinds of clients, or within certain kinds of businesses, verticals has been fairly easy to come up with a standard chart of account that seems to work for most clients?
The thing is, with the chart of accounts, you have natural accounts like postage or salaries and benefits. That's where I usually start. And then if there are unique expenses like contributions for a nonprofit, then you're going to add a range for that specific type of expense or revenue. But you start where all the 6600s, and that's just throwing something up against there. All 6600s are salary and benefit related. And your 6500s are rent and utility or operations.
So that's got to be key for hiring and training and scaling.
Absolutely.
New hires fast on your team.
Absolutely.
So
when I came into Sage or Armanino, we had 5 different platforms we were supporting clients on. And I can remember we had a brand new staff come in and they had 4 new clients all on different softwares. Now I have tried to standardize that. We still have 3 softwares that we're mostly supporting, but we've got a Sage Intacct team who then that person, then if there's any, if someone's on vacation, then the next person come over, you've got a lot of cross coverage for utilization of the system.
Yeah, that totally makes sense to have 4 different systems and have different charts of accounts, and like, how do you possibly
I don't know how you
scale
it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny because we always tell people when we implement their system to try to bring in as much general ledger history as possible, because I don't want them to have to go back to their old system. Mostly because today you remember your chart of accounts, you remember exactly how to get into everything, and it's so easy. And 2 months down the line, you forget that because you've fallen in love with Sage Intacct and you don't want to remember how to get into, let's say, the Great Plains of the world, like I did, and you forget how to access it. So it's important that you're consistent.
So that's some good best practices for beginners. What about when you come across a power user? Maybe it's at the Sage Partner Summit. Maybe you're talking with a product manager from Intacct. Maybe it's someone that you hired on your team that is coming in that already was using Intacct for 3 or 5 years in private industry, maybe with several nonprofits. And you're having lunch or a drink with them. And so what's your, it's not even a matter of like one-upping, like, hey, have you ever seen this? It's more like, you know, what is something that someone that's really advanced may not realize is there?
I find that if someone hasn't had the experience with account groups and actually building account groups by GL account instead of by category, that's another one of the magical things about Sage Intacct is that you can go and you can build using account groups. The trick there is making sure that you've got ranges. You don't do it by specific account to account. You do a whole range so that you've covered all of your, let's say, your income and expense accounts. And then you can create reports that exactly mirror what the lines are from, let's say, your 990 or a grant report that you have. Anyone who's been in nonprofits know that grant reports, generally the grants are different periods of time. And then a lot of times they'll want groupings of accounts, very non-traditional. So that's one thing. And the other trick that I like is user-defined books are really powerful. So I had a client who would take the data out of the system and then they would manipulate things and provide it to the board, meaning that they would reclassify things that weren't necessarily per GAAP, but it's how the board wanted to see it. So we added a user-defined book and did all of those journal entries in that user-defined book. So at any time in the future, I would be able to go back and replicate what that report looked like that I gave to the board. So if there were any changes, you were able to track any changes.
So that's user-defined books and having a range of general ledger accounts into a grouping to work more efficiently?
Yeah, it's using account groups based on accounts versus using account groups based on category.
And category.
So in Sage Intacct, every account that whenever you add an account, you're going, let me back up for a second. Sage Intacct comes with out-of-the-box reports. They have their standard reports. Those standard reports are based on account groups that are based on category. And every GL account in Sage Intacct, you assign a category. That way your out-of-the-box reports always work. Your balance sheet always works. Your income statement always works. Now, if you want to get to the next level of report writing, you are going to define account groups based on accounts. So let's say that for one client, you need to have salaries with consultants. You want salaries and consultants together. Well, those generally are going to be different categories. So you could put the two of those together in an account group and report on those. And you might want benefits down below and all of your office supplies or all of your general and administrative expenses. What you classify in that general administrative expense may change depending on what the report purpose is.
So it's not just a matter that the groups of accounts or the ranges of accounts are more granular than the categories. It's that sometimes you're picking and choosing accounts that are going across multiple categories? Absolutely.
Exactly the point. So the category, you only have one category per account, but you may have 15 different different things that you need to report on, or different users, different audiences of your reports. So you want to change how things show. And so your groups, you're using account groups by account number is one trick.
So this isn't just something that's useful for customizing different clients. This could even be the same client that has different audiences, like they're doing something maybe for field staff, for a subsidiary, for board,
right,
for, compliance.
Right. Or you may have, as I said, you have grantors. You have different grantors, and different grantors say, I'm going to support this bucket of expenses. And that bucket of expenses in your accounting have absolutely no relationship to one another. But in theirs, it has a big relationship. So it's a matter of how you're categorizing it, but you're using GL accounts.
Yeah, it sounds really powerful. It's a way to customize for what they really need to be able to display and have this something they can go back and get
Exactly.
to weekly, monthly, however, what frequency.
The point is, a lot of times I'll find that clients take data out of their general ledger and export it to Excel. Now, I love Excel. I'm very good at Excel. But when I tell people when I'm implementing them, I want to see every report that they're using in Excel so I can try to replicate that. And I can actually build that in Sage Intacct. So it's just a push of a button.
Yeah, that's another really interesting common trend that I've seen across a few of these interviews where people are slaying the Excel dragon, where they're going in and saying, I know you have this really comfortable spreadsheet that you've had with you for years, for 5-10 years. It feels like it's part of your family, like a pair of your favorite sneakers or jeans, but taking...
I can hang that up in the closet.
It's taking 6 hours a month, and it's going to take a day or two to set up, and 6 hours will become 15 minutes. Let me help you.
Yes. I mean, I had a client who was bringing in statistical accounts. So statistical accounts is another thing that's really cool about Sage Intacct. You report on things. You're tracking it in your financial system so you can pull reports. This particular example was they were tracking hours. It was an advertising agency, and they're tracking hours. And they had another system that they tracked all their hours in. We actually built a template that converted the information from their system into a journal entry import into Sage Intacct. That used to take my team 4 to 6 hours a month. It's now 10 minutes. They just export it. They put it in an Excel spreadsheet. It has VLOOKUPs. It converts it to digestible information by Sage Intacct, and you upload it. And now I can pull a financial statement, and on the face of my financial statement, I can have a line that says revenue per hour, earned revenue per hour, because the data's in there.
It's not even a matter of like 15 minutes compared to 4 to 6 hours. It's 15 minutes compared to 4 to 6 hours times 12. So it's like
exactly
60 to 72 hours a year. That's like 2 weeks of somebody's job a year. That's reduced to a half a day, maybe.
Right. Now they can actually use their brain and actually analyze things.
Kind of where everyone wants to move with accounting, where they're moving from coding and data entry to actually providing real insight.
Exactly.
So, Michelle, we talked about what would be your favorite advice for beginners with Intacct, with power users for Intacct. What do you see as a big across-the-board mistake that Intacct users are making that is fairly straightforward to prevent if they just knew about it ahead of time?
Sure. Dimensions. So as we talked about, there's the segment. Intacct uses dimensions to report on things like location of your department or a project or an employee. If you're going to use dimensions, I preach require them on every account, especially when you're talking about a nonprofit where you have different funds, and I want to be able to pull a trial balance that balances by the fund. The only way I can do that is if I use that I populate the dimension on every transaction. Now you can, if you don't have one, let's say you don't have a project, you have a no project. And then I can go and pull a general ledger for no project and actually audit all of my accounts for everything that had no project and actually say, oh geez, that one should have had a project, and edit it right then and there. But if you don't if you don't require the dimension, now if you try to filter things or expand things by that dimension, your reports don't work. Or you'll have no project or no location or no department over on the far right-hand side, but you can't drill into it and see the no departments, all the transactions that have no department.
So is this something fairly straightforward to require that when the transaction is entered? And then, so is there actually something that somebody checks off that says no department, or you just see it as blank and it allows you to group them all together?
It would just show as blank. If you don't require it, it would show as blank. Otherwise, you build in each of your dimensions, you would have a no location, a no department, a no project, a no class, or undefined, or whatever works best for you. The nomenclature of that is whatever works best for you. I used undefined because that way when I was keying information in, I would hit U, which isn't a very common letter in the alphabet, and so it would pre-fill for my undefined. You can also do a dimension relationship or a smart rule to populate, or a smart event to populate that.
So essentially it's set up as a dimension, but the dimension is basically saying I couldn't find the dimension. So does somebody go back and review that and manually reclassify it later, or decide if a dimension should be set up going forward?
Exactly.
Like an exception report kind of thing?
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah,
and that's very easy to set up. So when you set up your general ledger account, on the account, it asks you what dimensions are required if that account is used. So you just check off the dimensions. And obviously you don't need to have employee on everyone usually. You don't have to have vendor on everyone, but you can have vendor. That's the other nice thing is I can have a transaction that has something you wouldn't traditionally see. I could have a vendor used on an AR invoice if for some reason there was a relationship and I want to be able to track that in the general ledger, that it was related to that vendor.
So is that where this all really starts, that you can't open up a new account without specifying what the dimension is that you're trying to, the required dimension on that account?
You can add an account without any dimensions related.
Right.
I don't recommend it. I recommend that you require them if you're going to report on them. So for a nonprofit, a lot of times they'll use class to define the restrictions, unrestricted, temp restricted, and perm restricted. If you don't require that, someone can enter a transaction and not populate it. The thing is, if you require it on some accounts and not other accounts, when you think about the people who are entering the data in your system, it's challenging for them to remember, oh, right, this is this account, I had to populate these 3 fields. And for this account, I have to populate these 3 fields. So if you just require it on everything, data entry becomes easier, I think.
Especially with multiple people touching
exactly.
it. Yeah.
It's just consistency.
So then somebody can go on vacation and somebody can leave and move to another firm, other part of the firm, and yeah, it's a mess. Yeah. So the final area I want to speak with you about today is to get your thoughts on where this is all headed. What does the future of business outsourcing with Intacct look like for Armanino, thinking 12, 18, 24 months down the road? What if we were coming back and revisiting this discussion 2-3 years from now? Would we look back and say, oh yeah, that was the key inflection point? What do you think is the big central theme driving a lot of where we're headed in the future?
I think that being able to do outsourced accounting using Sage Intacct, which is a real accounting system, it's auditable. I mean, it's used by Fortune 500 companies. It's a real system at such a nominal price is just a gift, to be honest with you. And if you can get everyone in your team trained up on Sage Intacct and convert your clients to Sage Intacct, now again, you have that consistency within your team and you have a huge bench of folks who know how to use the system.
So is this something that you think is going to progress more rapidly, where Sage Intacct is going to be able to potentially take share from people that are using weaker systems or that are just spending way too much time in spreadsheets?
I've seen it with Armanino. I think we've quadrupled the number of clients we have on Sage Intacct in our outsourced accounting since I walked in the door 3 years ago.
Do you see most of those kinds of clients coming from desktop premise-based? Do you see them coming from cloud, or a little bit of both, or legacy proprietary? Or yeah.
Primarily desktop, because desktop, if you're going to outsource, is really hard. If someone's using something like Financial Edge and you have to Citrix server in to access their software, that anyone who's ever used Citrix knows that can be a not fun experience. Or you have to VPN into their computer. I mean, the fact that Sage Intacct is on the web, I mean, especially in today's day and age, COVID-19 changed all of that. Now suddenly we had clients calling us and saying, hey, can we change because we want to be able to use the ACH function in Sage Intacct. We want to be able to pay our clients and not have to be in the office. I tell the story years ago, when I was using it, I was standing in line at Marine World. Now that dates me because I think now it's called Six Flags with my kids. And I was the only one who could approve payments. I actually was able to pull up on my cell phone and approve and write a check on my cell phone, send that PDF to my team member who was in the office, print the check, and away he went.
So do you think this is in general just a reluctance of companies in the past to change from legacy premise-based technology, and then all of a sudden now there's really no choice?
Just the same as People don't want to let go of that Excel spreadsheet you were talking about. It's their best friend. That's the way we've always done it.
Change is hard. It's like the meme or the cartoon that was going around a month or two ago, which was most responsible for digital transformation. I think choice A was the CEO, choice B was the CIO, and choice C was COVID-19. And it's kind of a morbid cartoon to think about, but yes, it
did force it.
Yeah, and coming from,
I have a client right now who is using Financial Edge, and they're having to go into the office to actually get the mail and to write checks, and then someone else, because they don't want anyone in the office at the same time, someone else the next day has to come in and sign all those checks, and then either that executive director has to stuff the envelopes and put it through the postage machine, which they've never done before, or they have to leave it there for another day until the next person comes in and can actually process the checks.
The strange part too with all this cloud resistance is I think about all the natural disasters that have happened. And you're in Southern California, right? So,
I'm in Northern California.
Northern California, yeah. I mean, they're pockets of the country, especially on the coast or even in the Midwest, where nobody should feel that they're immune to bad stuff that can happen between earthquakes and fires. And I'm in Hurricane Alley in South Florida.
Wow.
You know, if you think about like if business continuity and disaster recovery wasn't getting people serious about something sitting in a server closet, or on somebody's desktop.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. No, the cloud is amazing. It just changed. I think it's changed life. It really has. And I really do. I joke. I'm completely in love with this product. I love using this product. I love helping people with this product. I love seeing the light go on when you're telling them about something. They're like, "Oh, that's how you can do it." I mean, that to me is just so much fun. And again, dimensions, when you're designing it, that's what's so important as you're implementing your system, is really decide what the end result's supposed to look like, what your reports are going to look like. And now how am I going to enter the data? What do I have? What triggers do I have to pull? What do I have to populate? I don't want to use dimensions just because I can use dimensions. I want to use dimensions because I need them. I want to be really informed about the decisions I make related to the dimensions.
Yeah, I guess if someone like yourself is then pointing this out to someone that doesn't think through what an implementation looks like from start to finish, it may get brushed under the rug and you have a lot of inefficiencies and inconsistencies.
Or they replicate what they already had. Well, in QuickBooks, we had a class, and Intacct has class, so we're going to use that same class for just that. It's like, stop, please stop. Let's start and think about that again.
It's like moving the clutter from one office to another because you don't want to clean out the file cabinet, or like moving from one server to another and bringing the files that nobody's touched in 20 years.
Exactly.
Very, very interesting times. Michelle, if somebody wants to learn more about the work that you do at Armanino, or has any questions about anything we talked about today, or just wants to follow you on social media, where's a good place for our viewers?
I'm on LinkedIn. I don't know how to give will it be attached to this?
Yeah. I'll link to it in the show notes. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Or they're welcome to send me an email. And I always see that on the bottom of every one of my emails is my cell phone. I really don't mind if I've been in the shoes of the clients where at 10 o'clock at night, you're trying to get something to do and it just won't work. And it's like, doggone it. So all of my clients have my cell phone, and they'll send me a text and say, hey, I have the choice to not answer, but I really want to help the client get through that pain because I've been there.
Like I said, when we started this interview, it's amazing how consistent the profile is of someone that's a Sage Intacct expert that has walked in the shoes of the clients before they got to the role of helping lots of different clients with Intacct. And yeah, that empathy is something I'm sure your clients tremendously appreciate.
Yeah. That's definitely what I strive to be, is empathetic. Care.
Well, Michelle, it's been fantastic. I really appreciate you sharing all your best practices around what to do with general ledger reporting and the ranges of accounts and requiring of dimensions to make it easier for the system to do what you want to do down the road, and your thoughts about the importance of cloud, especially in the times that we're operating today. This has been fantastic. Really appreciate it.
It's been great. I really appreciate you reaching out to me and giving me this opportunity to share my affection for the system.
Love of Intacct.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Michelle. Stay
You're
safe.
welcome.
Stay safe and keep in touch.
Thank you. You too. You too.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the AI in Accounting podcast. To subscribe and leave a review, check us out at blog.vic.ai or wherever you like to consume podcast episodes, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and YouTube.